Hi everyone, my name's Terry. I'm one of the intercessors here at church, and I get to share with you today my thoughts about Mark chapters 8 through 13. And I really like it because it focuses much on character building and how we see each other. So this is a great challenge to me. Up until chapter 8, we see that in the book of Mark, there's so many miracles listed and signs and wonders. And the people were witnessing Jesus healing the sick, raising the dead, even God speaking from heaven, saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." And clearly the Pharisees would have seen some of that going on too. And if they didn't see it personally, they would have heard about how Jesus was doing all these things. And yet, in chapter 8, it begins with the Pharisees asking Jesus for a sign to show that he was from God. Really? Did they really want to know if Jesus was the Messiah? Because no miracle would have been good enough. There was already so much that Jesus had done. It would have been sufficient if their hearts were right and if they had the eyes to see and a little bit of faith. But maybe they were fearful and controlling, and they were just proud and unable to accept the fact that their Messiah had come and he really was working there amongst them. You see, Jesus didn't fit into their box of understanding at all. And even though they knew Old Testament prophecy, they still couldn't see how he fit and fulfilled all the prophecies of the Old Testament. Instead of looking at his love and power and wisdom and the great ways he was showing compassion for the people, they focused on what they thought were his violations, like healing on the Sabbath, not fasting like other Jews, eating with sinners, being uneducated, coming from a poor town. They focused on maybe that he had rebuked them for following their traditions instead of the commandments, and they were greatly offended by him. And so this theme of offense keeps going on into chapter 8. This is my favorite part. Verse 38. The disciples are talking about a man who's following Jesus around, casting out demons in Jesus' name. And they tell Jesus that they rebuked him. And Jesus says, "Don't forbid anyone from doing miracles in my name." And maybe he meant, if people are showing compassion in my name, accept them. Jesus says, "He who is not against us is for us." This was probably hard for the disciples because they were, the elite, the ones who were being taught that this man following them around didn't fit into their programs or the classes that they had taken with Jesus or all the instruction. Here was an outsider. How could they accept what he was doing? But Jesus says, no, it's okay to focus on the result. Look for the fruit of this man's life. Maybe this man was imitating them. He was following them around, doing what they were doing, but he had enough faith to actually perform the miracles. Maybe he wanted to be in their group and like them. So Jesus challenges the disciples, and I believe us too, not to be offended because the guy is doing things a little bit differently than they did. So are we so inclusive? That's what I'm chewing on this week as I read this. How inclusive am I? Who doesn't fit into my box of Christian understanding? Doing things differently that I think, oh my gosh, that is just way too much for me to handle. Who offends us today? And who makes us think that, they're just misled, so we'll tolerate them and, we'll put on a happy face, but we don't really love them or want to hear their ideas or embrace them. Could it be the religious people who stick to their doctrines and we feel like, oh, wow, you're just doing doctrine week after week after week. Where's your connection to Jesus as a man and Holy Spirit? Could it be the people coming door to door to see us with different literature? How are we receiving them or engaging with them? And I can go through a whole list of people who profess to know Jesus but are operating differently than us. What do we think about them? Are we hiding from each other? I used to hide from people in the neighborhood coming around as I just didn't have the time or energy, or I felt like it was futile to try to engage with them. Do you feel like that too sometimes? What if we aren't moving in miracles today or seeing the revival that we want? We can imagine it out there on the horizon, but it's not coming in. We're not helping usher that in. Maybe because we're offended, kind of like the town of Nazareth. What if we get to heaven and see some of these same people there who operated outside of our Christian box of understanding and are like, what are you doing here? Would it make us feel like God made a mistake? Or would we fall on our face and say, wow, I really missed getting to know these people and their understandings of the Bible or God himself? How inclusive are we? Are we on track to help usher in Jesus' dream of the church being one and united? Are we actually doing the opposite and helping to bring more division? I don't know. All of these things I'm just putting out there as questions today, not as judging our church or my brothers and sisters. I just want us to think a little bit about it, chew on it, because I think we'll get more revelation as we ask God for revelation. And when I talk about inclusion and embracing other people who believe in Jesus, I just want to say right up front right here that I'm not talking about condoning sin or churches that teach there's no such thing as sin. All we have to do is love each other, and that Jesus didn't really mean it, or the disciples didn't really mean it when they taught about living certain holy ways. I believe that God's standards are for us to be a holy people, set apart for him, that he does take sin seriously. So when I'm talking about inclusion and all that, I'm talking about embracing people who have maybe different approaches than us, different character, a little bit different beliefs, come from different denominations and such. How can we grow from them and them from us? It's interesting to me that in chapters 8 and 10 of Mark, right around this whole issue of inclusion that I talked about in chapter 9, but right around that, Jesus is talking about the concept of children and being Christ or childlike. And he's talking about being humble and how we approach each other and letting humility to be our first response and love like children. We must be like that. And he keeps going back to it. What point is he making here? Is he talking about giving people the benefit of the doubt like children do when they first meet them? You know how sometimes we protect our children and we think, oh, they trust strangers, and we teach them, don't talk to strangers or whatever. And we teach them the extreme end of it. But when we become mature adults, do we really need to keep living like don't talk to strangers? In all my years of teaching, what I used to see with most children is that they were not suspicious of other people. Whether they were students their own age or older children or whatever, they weren't suspicious and they were not aggressive initially. They knew how to show grace. Maybe this is what Jesus is saying to us. Imitate that kind of behavior. Let that be our first response. So I just want to pray, God, help us. Please help us as a people. Challenge us to be more embracing and open-minded so that we could see the good in each other and not be initially walling off our hearts because we don't understand each other. In a time that we're going through right now, help us, Lord, to look for the good in each other rather than focusing on our differences, because this is not advancing the kingdom. Thank you that you're able to do that in us as we submit to you. We give ourselves to you in this way. Thank you for today. And I hope that what I shared a little bit makes you think. That was just my intention. And if it makes us think about some of these things a little bit more, I'm happy with that. And I leave you with that, and I bless your day. Bye.